The minister's unsteady acts. On July 28, 1540, the most powerful man in England after the king himself knelt on the scaffold at Tower Hill. Just weeks earlier, he had been the Earl of Essex, Lord Great Chamberlain, and King Henry VIII's chief minister. Now he was simply a condemned traitor awaiting the executioner's blade. Cromwell had engineered the king's divorce from Catherine of Aragon and dismantled England's monasteries. He had rewritten laws and destroyed rivals with ruthless efficiency. But when he arranged Henry's disastrous marriage to Anne of Cleves, his enemies seized their chance. The king who had once trusted him completely now signed his death warrant without hesitation. As Cromwell knelt on the rough wooden boards, his neck exposed on the block, witnesses reported he showed little fear. The crowd was large but quiet. Many had come to see the downfall of a man they had feared for years. The appointed executioner, however, was not the tower's experienced headsman, but a replacement, less skilled, less practiced in the swift mercy of a clean stroke. The axe rose in the air. When it fell, it struck not cleanly but awkwardly, catching Cromwell's skull at an angle. Contemporary accounts describe how the blade failed to sever the neck. Cromwell did not die instantly. He remained conscious, blood pouring from the partial wound, aware of what was happening as pain exploded through his body. The executioner raised the axe again. A second blow fell, still not enough to complete the beheading. Some chroniclers claimed it took a third stroke before Cromwell's head was finally separated from his body. The once powerful minister who had orchestrated so many deaths now experienced his own in prolonged agony. His final moments stretched into an eternity of suffering as the incompetent executioner hacked at his neck. When the head was finally held up to the crowd, it was hardly the clean befitting a nobleman. The spectators who had come for justice left having witnessed something far more disturbing. He broke his own neck to escape the worst. On January 31st, 1606, a weakened man was dragged from his cell at the Tower of London to meet his fate. For 3 months, Fawkes had endured brutal torture after being discovered guarding explosives beneath Parliament, the infamous gunpowder plot to assassinate King James I and restore Catholic rule to England. His planned execution was designed not merely to kill, but to deliver maximum suffering as a warning to others. The sentence of hanging, drawing, and quartering was reserved for traitors, and Fawkes knew exactly what awaited him. First, he would be hanged until nearly dead. Then, still conscious, he would be cut down, his removed and his abdomen sliced open. His intestines would be pulled out and burned before his eyes would remain alive. Finally, his body would be quartered, the pieces displayed across London. A cart carried Fawkes through streets lined with thousands of spectators eager to see the Catholic conspirator punished. When he arrived at the scaffold in Old Palace Yard, Westminster, he climbed weakly to the platform. The noose was placed around his neck. Witnesses reported that he appeared calm, despite knowing the horror that awaited him. But Fawkes had one final act of defiance planned. As the cart was pulled away to begin his hanging, he did not wait passively. According to contemporary accounts, Fawkes suddenly jumped from the ladder with enough force to break his own neck. Some reports suggest he may have climbed higher on the scaffold than permitted, giving himself enough height for a fatal fall. The snap was audible to those standing nearby. In an instant, Fawkes denied his the spectacle they had prepared. His body still swung from the rope, but the man was already gone. The executioner cut him down to begin the disembowelment, only to discover Fawkes had escaped the worst of his punishment. The planned torture would continue on a corpse that could no longer feel pain. The first known drawing and quartering. On October 3rd, 1283, the last native Prince of Wales stood before a crowd in Shrewsbury, England. Dafydd had led the final Welsh rebellion against King Edward I, continuing to fight even after his brother Llywelyn's death. When captured hiding in a bog with his family, he became the first nobleman sentenced to a punishment designed to make even the bravest men tremble, drawing and quartering. Edward I wanted to make an example of this Welsh rebel. The king personally crafted a sentence unprecedented in its deliberate cruelty, creating what historians now recognize as the first fully documented case of this method. Court records show Edward's precise instructions for each stage of suffering Dafydd would endure. As the prisoner was brought to the execution ground, he could see the implements prepared for his destruction: knives, a hanging scaffold, horses, and a fire. Chronicles describe how he was first dragged through the streets of Shrewsbury tied to horses, his body scraping against the rough ground, tearing his skin and filling his wounds with dirt and stones. At the scaffold, executioners placed a noose. He was hoisted up, but only briefly, not long enough to die. The real torture was yet to begin. Cut down while still conscious, Dafydd was strapped to a table as
William Craig
approached with a knife. Contemporary accounts describe how his abdomen was cut open while he remained alive and aware. His intestines were pulled out slowly and thrown into a fire burning within his sight. Witnesses reported that Dafydd remained conscious through much of this process, his screams gradually weakening as his body was systematically destroyed. The executioner then cut out his heart, displaying it to the crowd before burning it as well. Only after these torments was he finally beheaded. His body was divided into 4 quarters, each sent to different corners of the realm: York, Winchester, Northampton, and Bristol, while his head was displayed on the Tower of London, a warning to all who would challenge the English crown.
Người bị kết án treo cổ
The
kéo lết và
hanged
tứ
man
phần thi
who
thể vì
didn't
tội
die
phản quốc.
twice.
Người sẽ bị
On
xử theo
November
luật pháp
13th,
tàn khốc của thời
1290,
đại.
a 30-year-old Welsh rebel
Ta
stood
nhận
beneath
bản
the
án của
hastily
mình.
constructed gallows outside Swansea Castle. William Craig, whose actual name was William ap Rhys, but was called Craig, meaning scabby in Welsh, had been captured after leading raids against English settlements. The Norman Lord of Gower, William de Breos, had personally ordered this execution to send a message to other Welsh rebels. The execution was set to be a public spectacle. Craig was marched out alongside another condemned Welshman named Traherne ap Hywel. A significant crowd gathered to witness their punishment. The gallows had been constructed quickly using green wood rather than seasoned timber. As Craig was led up to the platform, observers noted his calm demeanor despite knowing what awaited him. The noose was placed around his neck. When the signal was given, he was pushed from the platform. His body dropped and jerked at the end of the rope. For several minutes he hung there, his face darkened, his body twitching as he slowly asphyxiated. Witnesses later testified that he urinated and defecated as his body shut down, typical signs of death by hanging. Suddenly, there was a crack. The gallows, poorly built with unseasoned wood, partially collapsed under the weight. Craig fell to the ground, still with the rope around his neck. Guards quickly strung him up again on what remained of the structure. This time, they left him hanging until all movement stopped. After being pronounced dead, his body was given to his family for burial. What happened next became the subject of a papal inquiry. According to multiple sworn testimonies, Cry revived the following day. His body, which had turned black and stiff, began to regain color. He opened his eyes and began to breathe again. Those present were astonished. Some claimed it was a miracle attributed to Thomas de Cantilupe, the former bishop of Hereford. Lord de Breos was unmoved by claims of divine intervention. Craig was recaptured and again, this time on a properly constructed gallows that did not fail. His second death was permanent. The felon who woke up in the morgue. On December 17th, 1363, a horse thief stood before the crowds at Dublin's main gallows. Trop had been captured after stealing horses from several prominent landowners in County Dublin. In medieval Ireland, horse theft was considered a serious crime, often punishable by death. After a brief trial, Trop was sentenced to death until dead. The day was bitterly cold as he was led to the wooden platform. Observers noted that he trembled, though whether from fear or the winter chill was unclear. The hangman worked quickly, placing the noose around Trop's neck and adjusting it to ensure proper placement behind the ear. A position meant to break the neck quickly rather than causing slow strangulation. When the trapdoor opened, Trop fell and jerked violently at the end of the rope. His body swung for the customary amount of time as the crowd watched. After being cut down, a local physician confirmed his death by checking for breath and pulse. Finding none, he was declared dead, and, as was customary for criminals without family claims, his body was taken to St. John's Church to await burial in the morning. What happened during the night became notorious in Dublin for decades. According to church records and witness accounts, the church sexton heard noises in the early hours of the morning. Trop had revived. The hanging had not broken his neck, nor sufficiently cut off his breathing. Instead, the cold weather had slowed his bodily functions, creating a state resembling death. Now conscious and terrified, Trop broke out of the church through a side window. He was disoriented, his neck bruised and damaged from the rope. He managed to stagger only a few hundred yards before collapsing in the street, where he was discovered by the night watch. They immediately recognized the dead man and seized him. The authorities were determined not to repeat their mistake. The following day, Trop was brought back to the gallows. This time they used a new rope and kept his body hanging for twice the usual duration. After being cut down, his corpse was left exposed for a day to ensure death was complete before burial. The fanatic torn apart at the King's Square. On May 27, 1610, a 32-year-old former school teacher and religious fanatic was led to the Place de Grève in Paris. Just 13 days earlier, Ravaillac had stabbed Henry IV of France to death as the monarch's carriage was caught in traffic. The assassination shocked France. Henry had been a popular king who ended the wars of religion and brought prosperity after decades of civil conflict. Ravaillac claimed he had killed the king because Henry was planning to wage war against the Pope. During his brief trial, he refused to name any co-conspirators, insisting he had acted alone. The Parliament of Paris sentenced him to the most severe punishment in French law, death by dismemberment. On the execution day, a massive crowd gathered at the square. Temporary viewing stands had been constructed to accommodate the spectators, many of whom had paid for the privilege of watching the king's killer die. Ravaillac was brought to the scaffold in a tumbrel cart. Witnesses described him as pale but composed, muttering prayers as he approached his fate. The execution began with torture. Ravaillac hand, which had held the knife, was burned with sulfur. Executioners then used red-hot pincers to tear flesh from his chest, arms, and legs. Molten lead, boiling oil, and and burning sulfur were poured into these wounds. Throughout this process, Ravaillac remained conscious, his screams echoing across the square. For the final punishment, 4 horses were harnessed to each of his limbs. The executioners expected his body to separate quickly, but medieval accounts describe how the horses pulled for nearly an hour without success. His joints would not separate. Finally, executioners had to partially sever his shoulders and hip joints with knives before the horses could tear his limbs away. Even after this mutilation, witnesses reported that Ravaillac's facial expressions still showed signs of life. His torso, now without limbs, continued to show movement for several minutes. The crowd, far from showing sympathy, rushed forward to claim pieces of his body and clothing as souvenirs. His dismembered remains were burned to ashes and scattered to the winds, leaving nothing for burial or remembrance. Smithfield's sudden... On June 15, 1381, the leader of England's peasants' revolt arrived at Smithfield just outside London's walls. Tyler had emerged as the charismatic head of a massive uprising that had already stormed the Tower of London, executed the Archbishop of Canterbury, and burned the Savoy Palace. Now he came to meet the 14-year-old King Richard II, ostensibly to negotiate terms for ending the rebellion. The meeting had been arranged after Tyler's forces took control of much of London. Thousands of rebels waited nearby while Tyler, accompanied by a small group, approached the king and his retinue. Tyler was not a nobleman, but a former soldier with military experience. He rode forward confidently, drinking from a flask of ale as he prepared to present the rebels' demands for lower taxes and an end to serfdom. What happened next was recorded by multiple chroniclers. Tyler approached the king and behaved with unprecedented familiarity. According to witnesses, he called for water to rinse his mouth, then washed his hands in front of the monarch, a shocking breach of protocol. Some accounts claim he even placed his hand on the king's arm, an act that horrified the royal entourage. William Walworth, the mayor of London, immediately objected to Tyler's behavior. Words were exchanged, tensions escalated, and suddenly Walworth drew his sword and stabbed Tyler in the neck. As blood poured from the wound, Tyler tried to remount his horse to escape, but Ralph Standish, one of the king's squires, thrust a sword into his abdomen. Tyler managed to ride about 60 yards before falling from his horse, critically wounded but still alive. The rebel leader lay in the dirt of Smithfield, blood poured beneath him. As the king's men surrounded him, Tyler remained conscious, aware that his revolution was collapsing around him. Walworth ordered Tyler carried to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, but this wasn't an act of mercy. Once there, he was dragged back out and beheaded on the steps. His head was mounted on a pole and paraded through the streets of London before being displayed on London Bridge, the very bridge where days earlier the rebels had placed